Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to an audience with the pioneers of #inclusive HR. I'm here today with Rachael Tyler, the Development Director of the HPMA, Manal, Sadik from Guy's and St Thomas's, and also David Grantham, who's one of our CPOs. So it's really wonderful to have you all here with us today. Essentially, we're going to be exploring #inclusive HR, just making sure that people understand and know what it's all about. And the session's really going to highlight some of the positive actions that we've actually taken and the interventions that have been led by the pioneers, but also many of the people that have actually pledged and committed their support in their capacity as either advocates or allies of the social movement. And essentially, this is really just to improve the equality, diversity and inclusion for the HR profession itself. So it's going to take the form of an inquisitive conversation where we'll get to explore the various facets of the social movement and what it's actually done for the HR profession as we go forward. If you've got any questions, queries, please pop them in the chat box and feel free to tweet or share on other social media forums. The hashtag is #I inclusive HR. So without further ado, I think I'll hand over to Rachael.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I should say, if everything goes according to plan, we're going to hopefully have about 10 minutes at the end for questions. And as we're a relatively small group, hopefully you'll feel that you can ask questions. So do think about those as we go through. So we're going to take quite a dynamic approach. We're each going to ask questions of the other. And I'm going to start off by asking Cheryl some questions about the work that we've all jointly been leading. So Cheryl, the first question to you is, what is #inclusive HR and how did it start?
So I think it's fair to say that #inclusive HR started off as a result of mentoring a number of HR and OD professionals in the field who basically had started to share their experiences and the roller coaster ride that they were experiencing as Black, Asian, minority ethnic members of the HR and OD profession. And actually those experiences were not good. And so this work started with that, and then linking in with the HPMA, who then managed to secure some funding for us to actually commission some research into this work. And we found that there wasn't any research in this space. And so it is really innovative and at the forefront, the fact that we've actually started to explore the experience of Black, Asian and minority ethnic HR and OD professionals in the field. And that's how it's really all started.
Thank you. And my next question follows on from that, and that is, can you really highlight what you think the key achievements have been and maybe some of your learning as well from that work?
So I think that the key achievements around this is certainly, I think that we have between Rachael and I spearheading this as a joint programme and with the commitment of our HR leaders. I think that we have really managed to galvanise the profession to start to take an inward look at the experience that its staff are actually having, which wasn't previously surfaced. So I think we've absolutely managed to actually raise the profile on this. I think we've been able to actually illuminate the inequalities and also to actually really make sure that people understood that actually the inequalities that we see in society are all replicated in our organisations and our HR departments. But it is particularly difficult when you work in HR and you belong to one of those minority groups and your experience isn't positive. It's really difficult to be able to actually speak up about that. So I think this gives us a vehicle for being able to start to examine the experience that our staff are having and to look at what the actions are that we can take to remedy that. So I think some of the key things that we've actually been able to do is we've managed to actually raise the profile on the issue. I think that we've actually managed to galvanise HR leaders across the system to actually start to think about the actions that they need to take. And we've also managed to get some of our leaders, quite a significant proportion of our leaders across the system, to speak up positively in this space and to be vulnerable, to be open and to be transparent about their understanding and their experience around the inequalities agenda and how they can think about their own leadership style and the actions that they want to take in order to actually make that happen, but to do it in a way that actually positively impacts staff themselves. And I think the other thing that we've managed to do is we've actually created a resource hub where we're actually able to actually support staff to actually have a more balanced career conversation with their line managers, but also for line managers to be able to also go to the career hub to actually start to look at how they can have good conversations, but also putting some of the resources out there for people to be able to see and to be able to map their career accordingly, which is really important because some of those things happen in some circles, but they don't happen in all circles. And that's definitely been one of our big achievements. And just following on from that, the other bit that we've done, other than trying to get people to speak up and talk about their experiences, we've also managed to galvanise the CIPD as well in this space, and we've created an advocate and allies group, which is a safe space for our senior leaders to be able to learn about race and to talk about it confidently. And we've also got Peter Cheese as part of that group. So we're actually all on this collective journey to actually learn together and start to challenge one another and also start to think about what the future looks like. And as part of that, he's obviously released a blog that came out this week, beyond the processes and policies. So please do check that out if you haven't seen it. And we've finally also launched the Anti-Racist Leadership Programme, which you'll hear a bit more about later on.
Thank you. And if you just reflect back, Cheryl, over the last year and a half, really, we've been on this journey and a huge amount of achievements. What would you say are your sort of top learning, maybe your 3 top learning points from that?
So I think the top learning points for me probably are that actually there is a significant number of people that actually want to do something but are actually paralysed by fear. And I think that we need to think about how we actually start to overcome that. So I think that's one of the things that I've kind of learned as I've been on this journey. I think the other is starting to, I've also realised and started to note the lack of understanding around things like microaggressions and how discrimination shows up in the workplace. It's a lot more nuanced than it was when people of colour were invited to come here to come and work in our public services. And so I think that for people that are not touched by racism or discrimination, sometimes it's difficult for them to be able to spot when it's actually happening in the workplace and to be able to label it appropriately and to take the appropriate action and support staff. So I think we've got to get better at trying to do that. And I think the other thing that I've probably learned is that I think that we still have quite a long way to go. And whilst we've made some inroads, there is still much work to do in this space, and it requires everybody to be on board in this space.
And in some ways, my next question, I think you've already really demonstrated your passion for this work, but and your passion really exudes from you whenever you talk about it. And I think you're a really strong leader, externally and internally, for the profession for this work. Can you tell us a bit about that passion, why you're so passionate about it?
I'm passionate about this because naturally I am a Black woman. I'm a HR professional. I'm a senior leader. I'm an auntie. I'm a lot of things. And actually, I really want people to be able to see me for all that I am. And I think that we are in a space where society has conditioned people to think and believe and behave in ways that lead to people like me being discriminated. And having heard the experiences of the various people that I've mentored over the years, it just is unacceptable. And we have to move beyond the superficial stuff, getting accolades and things for, equality and diversity. We've really got to shift the dial and try and change the staff experience for these people. And these people exist in our organisations. And I think that part of my passion is because I feel that we need to now start to make an impact and change the current staff experience. And I also think that the weathering impact that is had and the evidence now that sits and is available out there about the impact racism and discrimination has on the Black, Asian and minority ethnic people means that this just is not good for our health. And we're a health service and we should be looking after all our staff. All of us are human. We're all made up of the same DNA. We just have different skin colouring to others. And I think we need to kind of work at how we actually start to break that down. And then I think lastly, the other bit for me is the fact that it's recognising the institutional racism that does exist and the barriers, the processes, the systems, and sometimes the cultures within our organisations are not conducive to actually supporting people of any, of varying protected characteristics. But the difference with mine is that I just don't have the opportunity to choose to disclose it. Actually, it's very obvious as to what my race is. So I think that a lot of us walk around and carry that backpack of hope. And I think that we have a duty and a responsibility collectively to actually lessen the load and make that load a bit lighter for me to carry. That means that I feel that I'm able to aspire and develop in the same way as the white majority.
Thank you. And finally, my last question is, what are your hopes and ambitions for the future?
So I think in terms of my hopes and ambitions for the future, I think that what I would like to see is that we have a more just and fair NHS as a whole. I'd like to see that we start to see the dial shift in society where we're less tolerant of discrimination in all its forms. And I think I would like, as a HR profession, that we're actually more conscious and more brave, more courageous, more aware, more willing to challenge all those incivilities and actually not trying to sanitize or whitewash them when it comes to race. Actually, if there is racism that is present within our organisations, we need to actually tackle it and we need to take action in this space. We can't simply, as a profession, try and sort of ride roughshod over it and pretend it's not as bad as it really is and try and label it as something else. And I think that as we move forward into the future, we're not going to be able to attract a diverse range of people into our profession at any level. And the current generation are not going to be as compliant and as tolerant as previous generations beforehand. And we never get change unless we actually really start to fight for it. And I think now we've got an opportunity for everyone to collectively fight to shift the dial in this space, because everyone's got the right to a really good staff experience. And our line managers are in privileged positions in that they can actually make the difference between a really great experience to a bad experience. So.
Thank you, Cheryl. I think you've really established the context and the passion and the ambition around this work. And thank you for leading it. I know you're now going to ask me some questions.
Yeah. So I was going to say,
I've got to follow you now, which is quite an ask, really.
So I think I'd probably just like to ask you a few things which you can share with the audience. And I think one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what is the greatest learning and what does it mean to be an ally?
I mean, I think what you've taught me, Cheryl, and what I've learned through this whole journey is that you can't nominate yourself as an ally. You can't say, I'm working as an ally without actually other people calling you an ally. So that the fact that other people are calling you an ally means that you've actually demonstrated through your actions, through your values, through your approach, through your determination to make a change, that you are an ally. And I feel really proud actually that you do call me an ally in this work. In terms of my learning, I see being an ally, it's both an internal and an external aspect to it. So the internal piece, I think, is the education, re-educating yourself, and I think as a lot of colleagues have done over the last year and a half, to really reevaluate their position in the world. I've reflected a lot on the fact that I'm a white middle class woman, and I've been afforded a number of opportunities as a result of that my ethnic minority colleagues haven't. And I think that my path through my career has been relatively straightforward, and I've had wonderful mentors along the way. But as you talked about the research that we did, and actually hearing the lived experience and putting myself in other people's shoes and understanding the injustices that exist, it's not as easy for others. And there is a breakdown in hope that you can achieve. You can't necessarily see people that look like you, as you say. You can't be it if you can't see it. So I think there's the internal re-education piece for myself, and then externally, it's about being prepared, I think, to disrupt the status quo.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to say that you're an ally and make a statement, maybe take some action, but unless that action is really disrupting that status quo, we're not going to see a step change in the experience of our colleagues. And I think that some of the work that we've done has been about changing that. So intentionally this year we commissioned 30% of our learning providers were ethnic minority providers. We've been intentional in our decisions around recruiting onto our aspirant programs so that we're seeing greater diversity on those programs. And going forward, really looking at the content of those programs and commissioning that anti-racist program, which I think hopefully should have a real longer term impact. So I think it is about taking concerted effort that you stick with your determination to see it through, and then hopefully over time, because this is complex work, it doesn't happen quickly, we will start to shift the dial, as you've said.
So that probably brings us nicely onto the anti-racist program that you just mentioned. Can you just tell us very briefly about the program and why it's so important?
Yeah, I mean, I do think this is the vehicle really through which we will hopefully embed and seed transformational change in establishing anti-racist leadership for the profession. And I think that's what's so critical about this. It's the first program of its kind that really focuses on us as a profession. I think in doing that with the profession, it has a broader impact on organisations and systems. So I think that's absolutely critical. We have 22 participants on that programme, both white, black, Asian and minority ethnic, senior HR leaders. And it's very much a programme that concentrates on you as an individual and your education around racism and anti-racist practice. And really starting to develop a cohort of leaders who can go out and positively disrupt the system, the norm around how we're doing this. And hopefully we will see, as those 22 participants develop and gain the confidence, the knowledge and the vision for how they want to embed anti-racist practice, we'll start to see a shift. So I'm hoping that we'll see that we'll be able to replicate that across the country so it can have a greater impact on the profession.
And I'm sure it will. So I think in the interest of time, I think you've kind of answered the next question that I was going to ask, which was about how you know that we would have made an impact. And I think you've kind of alluded to the impact and the fact that we'd want to scale it up moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fab.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to move to David Grantham. Thank you, Rachael. That was really, really helpful for you to just share your insights there and your learning. I'd just like to just move to David Grantham, who's our Chief People Officer from University Hospital Sussex Trust. You're one of the people and one of our leaders that has actually made a public pledge. And I'm just wondering, could you just say what made you want to make a public pledge to commit to advancing equality and inclusion within the HR profession?
I suppose, Cheryl, just because the case is so obviously made, and actually it's learning from people like yourself who I've worked with in the past. I've always been very privileged to have senior Black and minority ethnic colleagues in the organisations that I've worked with, and my eyes have sort of been opened a bit. You know, I think a lot of people say the COVID pandemic has really sort of changed people's understandings a little bit. And it is something that we want to fix. But actually, it's long in my history a little bit, but had probably sort of, fallen away. I mean, I used to be a member of the anti-apartheid movement when I was, a student at sort of sixth form and school and, at college and everything like that. And I think I'm probably a bit one of those privileged white people who then after that has sort of just drifted away from that agenda and not remembered, if you like, or experienced it from people like your own perspective. And actually that's just been brought back to me. So it is something we need to root out. We need to root it out anywhere. A lot of this programme and the work that I think people like you are doing is about actually getting us to apply some of the practice we're sort of suggesting should be applied elsewhere, but to ourselves. And it's the usual HR thing, isn't it? We're often busy fixing everybody else and not necessarily fixing our own issues as well.
Absolutely. I think that's really key, actually, to one of the things that we really ought to be looking to do and to actually focus on. But why do you think that some leaders don't feel comfortable to speak out about race?
I think it's a very emotive issue. People, I think, are fearful of accidentally saying the wrong thing. So, you have the debate about what terms should we use? People of colour, Black and minority ethnic. And that, I think, just in some cases, people just don't want to stir up a Twitter storm that they've used the wrong phrase, when they're well-meaning. There is something about trying to get it right and understanding from those communities, and people of colour and people that you're taking, what's appropriate. But actually, if you shy away from even having the debate because you're just worried about tripping up, you'll never open the conversation. No. I think the other thing is that actually it is difficult. There is, there's fear of tackling some of these issues a little bit in workplaces. So, what is microaggression? Beyond what might be actually, there is a performance issue with that particular Black or minority ethnic member of staff, and sometimes the distinctions will be real, and it doesn't mean the two don't go hand in hand. There might be microaggressions, but there may also be performance issues, and I think people are very, very wary of it, and we see that not only in the HR profession, but actually I think in other professions that we deal with. I'm a big fan of data. And the data is the sort of thing that I like to get underneath on some of these things to sort of show me what's going on. And actually, it's the case in London. It's just such an obvious case that something needs to be done. And I put in the chat, isn't it? 50% of London's population is from Black and minority ethnic communities, but we don't see that representation in any walk of life. 50-50 split should be the same. It should be the thing that we're seeing for everything almost. So it sort of becomes easy. But yeah, it's somebody asked me in the chat as well, what's the difference having moved from London to the south coast and Sussex? And actually it is different because the proportions are different and the strength of voices are different. And then how do you measure and assume that you're getting the right sort of proportionality?
Yeah.
It's a different conversation we have to have down there. But I encourage everybody to start, we should all be in this space. I don't think you can have fair workplaces and to be living true to the sort of values of what the people profession is all about if you're not tackling underlying racism and unintentional discrimination that arises through unconscious bias, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think that we need to do more of to get leaders to follow through on the courage of their convictions? Because some of them talk about this stuff privately, but they actually don't really talk publicly about it. What do you think that they should, that we need to do more of to get the leaders to speak out confidently and follow through?
I think things like the programme that's been run in London, I think is a really good starting point. So to have people in a safer space, where a group of them can sort of feel together. And I know in London that was starting to happen. So, with colleagues in North Central London and the other HR directors that have talked about this, you can see it's changing. But I think it is that sort of collectivism. And I also think it needs the voices of white people to be taking this forward. So, but they need good friends and colleagues who are from a Black and minority ethnic background to help steer them, but not in a way parking the problem with them. It's so you tell me I'm getting it wrong, I need to hear from you that I'm getting it wrong.
You will.
And what I do, and I know I do, and I know I could, but it's because we've got a trusting relationship, because we've known each other a long time. So I can say things to you, safe in the knowledge that if I get it wrong, you'll just tell me and you won't hold it against me. I think it's a very different thing to be doing that with an audience where you perhaps don't know all of those people, and being able to hold that conversation and feel confident enough about what you're saying and your acknowledged failings in perhaps getting it wrong sometimes, that I think is very uncomfortable for people.
Thank you very much, David, for sharing your insights and thoughts. I'm going to hand over to Rachael, who's going to interview Manal.
Hi, Manal. We'll have 5 minutes or so with questions for you, and then we'll open it out to the audience for the last 5 minutes. So Manal, can you tell us about the actions you've taken at Guy's and Thomas, and what have been your key achievements?
Yeah, thank you, Rachael. So we started on our #inclusive HR journey last December, actually, and it followed on from the trust-wide conversations that we were having around Black Lives Matter and the impact of COVID. And I think, David, as you said, we weren't really doing a lot for our HR staff that were providing that support to the business. So we started with an open session to everybody within HR, and really enabled and encouraged people to speak out about their experiences. But it was also very apparent that not everybody felt comfortable to speak in such an open forum. So we aligned that with an anonymous Padlet, which we sent out prior to the open session, and received over 40 comments on that Padlet that we were able to bring in when we had the open conversations. But what that really started was a movement, if you like, within our HR directorate that people started to have different conversations, and we're starting to have these conversations within HR, their own personal experiences, but looking at the way that we would do things, and the way that we would support the business. So we then subsequently had a second session where we brought together all of the themes from the anonymous Padlet, plus the conversations that were being had. And it was really timely because it was also when the HPMA research and the findings were also being presented. So we were able to really kind of, I suppose, time the experiences of the staff within Guy's and St Thomas's with the findings that were coming out from the report. We also at that session shared the demographic data around our HR group. So that was again something that we hadn't really done. So we looked at the different directorates, so organisational development, training and development, HR, occupational health. We broke it down by grades and by ethnicity, and we were able to kind of, and staff survey data, and really kind of be quite visible and transparent about what our HR directorate looked like and why we needed to start to make real changes. So, so following on from two really good sessions, we created two work streams. So one work stream was around career progression, and the other one was around cultural change. And it was picking up all of the things that came through through the report, but also from our individual staff. We also used the resources that you had on your HPMA pages and the realising your potential, the exposure model, and the work streams. We meet monthly, so we open them up to everybody within HR and invited anybody to join one or both of those. And we set some clear goals based on the evidence. And where we've got to now is that we've created a model, if you like, based on the exposure model, and we've overlaid that with cultural competence. So all the things that we've, that you've all spoken about in terms of, how do you engage with your manager, and how do you make your PDR work, and how do you stretch yourself, and curiosity, and how do you use feedback, coaching and mentoring, all the things that we know are really important. But also we've added a lens to that around inclusion, around cultural competence, around creating psychological safe space to speak, about compassionate conversations. And what we've got to now is a package or a model, if you like, where managers and employees can take responsibility for their own development and learning, their own being able to navigate around the career development opportunities that we have, but also managers being able to feel more equipped and enabled to have these conversations. So we now run monthly lunch and learn sessions where we talk about microaggressions and incivility, beyond bias, authentic allyship, intersectionality, the impact of spiritual care, and these go on. And it's really to provide both that kind of real structured work stream, and these are apprenticeships, for example. This is what networking we have available on top of that really important element of looking through an ED&I lens, and specifically an anti-racist lens. And so we've recently been able to present that back to the whole directorate, so everybody can see that it wasn't just lip service, and it wasn't just a moment in time, but this is a continuation of our commitment and our priority. And we have a number of career sessions where we've got senior leaders talking about their career journeys, and that's to everybody within HR. And we've also reinstated our one-to-one coaching sessions as well. So there's a whole package of work that is continuing to happen, and we're nowhere near finished. But I think in a year, which sounds like quite a lot of time, I think we've really changed the environment and allowed people to start talking about this in a much more confident way.
Thank you, Manal. And really what you've described is a model template and good practice, and how to take forward the actions that we conceive through #InclusiveHR. How would you like to see others take this forward?
So firstly, just saying I'm happy to share what we've developed so far. It's nowhere near perfect, but I think it might be a good starting point for people. I think one of the important elements is really about visibility and priority, and that this is really important. And I think that needs to be led from the top as well, that there needs to be that commitment that this is instrumental in developing not only inclusive practices, but I think, Cheryl, as you said, about ensuring that all of our staff have a positive experience when they come to work and do the best job that they possibly can. So I think creating space to have real conversations is really important, and that psychological safe space, and to put some clear kind of measures of what is it that you want to see, because otherwise it can appear to be tokenistic and can appear to be a tick box. So I think it's about visibility. I think it's about commitment, and prioritizing this. And we're all working extremely hard, and there's lots of operational pressures. But this is how we can retain our staff and retain our good staff, and for them to have a positive experience. So I would say create space to have these conversations and see what your staff are telling you.
Thank you, Manal. We're now at the end of our bit. I'm wondering, I haven't seen any questions in chat. Ellie, are there any questions that have come through that we haven't seen? So just in the last few minutes, would anyone like to raise any questions or make any comments on what you've heard? I'll leave it for a few seconds, and if nothing comes up, we can conclude the session. Ellie says no currently.
Rachel?
So please, yeah.
I wonder if I could ask Manal, it's a little bit relevant to the point I put in the chat actually, about how, having set a lot of these things up, are you managing sort of, people's, keenness for things to be changed and to be better and for problems to be solved? Because I think that's also quite difficult. We can't right the wrongs of, slavery and things like that, but we can make it better. And I think there is a bit of there's an impatience obviously to get it right. But there is also some of this is, it's nitty gritty work that's going to take some time and quite a lot to dismantle and rebuild. How do people in your groups that you're talking to feel about, how do you manage that sort of pressure for change?
So that's a really good question. So I think there is that real, that real understanding that there are some things that we can work around processes, structures quite quickly. But I think, in terms of that cultural change, it does take time, but it also takes all of us to do that. And so the work streams keep, every month we have a work stream, and every month there'll be somebody new that comes along. So, there's a real appetite for people to get involved. And I keep saying to people, you need to be part of the change for change to happen, and to make sure that it's the right type of change. So I think for me, it's about, this isn't an ED&I piece of work, and it shouldn't sit with me. So I've very much tried to embed this within the whole of the HR directorate, and make sure that there's real representation. And this is led by everybody and not led from an ED&I perspective only, which is, I think, how you get change to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Manal. We haven't got any other questions, so I'm just going to hand over to Cheryl to see whether there are any final comments, the closing comments you want to make. Oh, Linda. So Linda Gent said, what value do you feel there is in coaching for inclusion offer? I'm wondering who is able to answer that question. Did others see that question?
It just flashed up on the screen. Linda, do you want to come in? If you raise your hand, you can actually come into the room to talk about the coaching for inclusion offer. I'm not sure if she's able to do that.
Cheryl, do you know much about the coaching for inclusion, or Manal?
I'm not sure which offer she's referring to. I know that we actually have a sort of a coaching and mentoring register, but I'm not sure if there is a specific offer or which one she could be referring to. But I think that we definitely need to support people.
We're 10 past now, so we can take that offline with Linda and follow up with Linda. So Cheryl, over to you for final comments.
So I'd just like to end by saying that we've got a real opportunity to make this change together. And I would just urge everybody to speak to your HR leaders. Those are leaders at every level, and start to talk about understanding the lived experience. And the key things that you really need to do are run the data in your own department, analyse the data, look at the lived experience and start to understand the experience of different people within your HR department, and then start to co-create the actions and interventions that can actually work, some of which you've heard from Manal today. And the last thing is to evaluate it and, of course, to shout about it. So please do go on to Twitter and other social medias and share some of the work that you are doing. You will inspire others on this journey to actually creating a fairer and more just experience for our HR and AD colleagues. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Really appreciate your attendance and hope that you've got lots out of today. And thank you to my colleagues, David Grantham, Manal and Rachael, who's been by my side throughout the whole of this. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Take care.